Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this exciting session of LitFestx. We're with Claudia Gray from New Orleans, and I have a really nice introduction for Claudia. For those of you who don't know, she actually worked as a lawyer, a journalist, and a disc jockey. And before that, as she says in her own words, an extremely poor waitress. But now Claudia lives in a lovely house which is colored purple in New Orleans, and the house is over 100 years old, and that's where she is right now, and we are beaming, live to you viewers. Um, Claudia, welcome to LitFestx.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This is exciting.
So, Claudia, you started out by writing a best-selling series, which is a paranormal romance series, and then in between you also shifted, or rather did two books for in the Star Wars
Mm.
series. How have you been sort of managing these two, I would say, fairly diverse genres?
The two genres don't have that much to do with each other, but the fans of these genres, there's a lot of overlap. That Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap there. And I've always fallen straight in the center of that Venn diagram. To me, these are both genres that I've loved reading, have dreamed of writing. So it doesn't feel like that much of a stretch, even though really they're very different. They both sort of call on the inner geek, I guess. My inner geek is an outer geek, really. I know that about myself.
Wow. How did you first start writing? I mean, given that you've had so many different careers and different phases in life, when did you decide, well, this is what I want to do?
It took a really long time. I always wanted to write, always tried to write. I remember as a very small child coming up with stories about the movies I'd seen. Well, what happens next? I always wanted to know that. And but I never really said yes, and I'm going to try and become a writer. It was a very abstract kind of dream. But when you dream about this, nobody ever goes like, "That is such a great plan. You should definitely become a writer. You're going to be very rich. You'll have no financial problems there. Your family." And I always played it very safe, and I don't really regret that, honestly. Now that law school has finally paid off, I can look a little more objectively and go, I did learn a lot there about how the world works. I got to live in several different parts of the country doing the different things that I've done. I had a lot of experiences, but writing was always sort of that dream. I wrote fan fiction. I wrote a great deal of fan fiction, Kumaar, like so much. And I knew that that was getting better. I could tell from the responses I was getting and my own instincts. And I think really finally I sort of thought, if I can do that, because by now I was writing novel length fanfics. It's like, if I can do that, surely I can do this. And, I sort of made that leap and got very lucky because I happened to be writing something which was sort of a teen-oriented paranormal thing without any knowledge that this was not a huge market segment and was about to be a huge market segment. Like, I didn't really understand about the rise of YA, but fortunately I found an agent who did. But I would say I didn't really believe, like, yes, this will be my job, until I would say about my second or third book. I didn't quit my day job until after my third book had come out. Well, no, after it had been written. Had it come out yet? No, it wasn't out yet, but it was about to be. Sorry, I had to go through that for myself. So yeah, it took a really long time for me to say, yeah, you actually can do this. As of now, I guess I've been out about 7 years writing full time, and that is still strange to me. There's still days where I go, what? No, really? Really? That's your job? That's your whole job? But yeah.
So that's
Did that
amazing.
answer your question?
Absolutely, but I'm curious to know more. You seem to have got the, if I can call it, formula. Right there. Like you mentioned, two very diverse genres of books between Star Wars and paranormal romance, but you seem to have understood young adult fiction really, really well in terms of what readers are looking for. And do you find that you have to do a lot of thinking and research in terms of what readers want, or are you just, doing it the way you would like to?
Mostly the second. I have a pet theory, which is that nobody ever fully recovers from being 16. We like, yeah, we like to pretend we got over it. We don't. We don't. There are still moments where you think of stuff that happened then with, either so much enjoyment or so much embarrassment. It's that time of life affects you very deeply. And for the most part, I really try to tap into that and write what I would have wanted to read then, which is not honestly in some ways that different from what I want to read now when it comes to really fun escapist stuff. I will say, like, I do hang out, in Tumblr, and now my nephews and godchildren are sort of in their teens, and so I do listen to sort of what younger people are saying and things that are on their minds and ways their perspectives differ from mine in a way. The internet is a huge game changer in that way. Thank God it didn't exist when I was a teenager. Like, I'm so relieved it didn't, because there's a whole lot of sort of meanness and crudity that teens today have to deal with that we didn't, and very much in your face. But on the other hand, they're able to reach out to people like them, to connect with people on so many different levels and in so many different ways. And a lot of them are, that experience has made a lot of them much smarter and given them much broader perspectives than I think a lot of us had sort of in the pre-internet era, when, your friends were the people closest to you and they might or might not share this particular trait or interest.
And opposed to now people coming together from all across the world basis on what they're
Mm-hmm.
interested in, right? Without having
Right.
any shared histories or memories.
Exactly. And that can be, something as trivial as, oh my gosh, you love the 1990s X-Men cartoon that's on Netflix? I do too. Or sort of more meaningfully, you're a kid in a small town and, you're gay. You don't know anybody who's gay, but maybe you go on the internet and people can talk to you about your experiences and your thoughts, and you don't feel maybe so much like, I'm a freak, I'm alone. You understand, like, no, there are people out there in the world like this.
Sure. And so, do you think that is a large, driver of the way then today's teens are consuming fiction? It is that sense of shared bonding or sense of shared belonging to a particular kind of content.
Yes and no. I mean, certainly reading is a much more social activity than it was when I was a teenager holed up with my books. You have so many wonderful sort of booktubers and book communities where, it's a popular thing to do. It's a social thing to do in a way that it just wasn't before. That said, there is still something incredibly intimate about reading a book and having that story half in words and half in images you have in your own head. And I don't think it's sort of become less personal in that way. I think anybody of any age still to this day, when you're really drawn into a book, there is something that's just you in the book, and you love that. I do anyway.
You know, um, talk us through some of the characters in your series, and how did you go about developing them?
Gosh, which ones? Which ones?
Which is your
Which
favorite
series?
one? Which is your favorite one?
A Thousand Pieces of You, probably.
Right.
Probably. Um, For those who may not have read it, it is the story of Marguerite, and she's the daughter of two famous scientists, and she's chasing her father's killer through alternate dimensions. So, I had this idea. I wanted people traveling through the dimensions, and this was sort of unusual for me because the characters sort of wandered in a way. I didn't go, oh, who would be here? They were sort of with the idea from the beginning, but they had to take shape. For Marguerite, one thing that was sort of important, it began as just a tactical thing because there's a lot of science in the book, right? But I didn't want the entire book to be like, let's talk about different quantum realities, because, it's not a popular science book. It's an adventure. And so that created the idea that Marguerite would be somebody who was an artist, not somebody who was very scientifically inclined. And so, but she's grown up in this household where her parents are super scientists, her older sister has gone into the sciences, all these grad students are in the house all the time. So she's been surrounded by this her whole life. And as a result, I think she maybe doesn't credit her own abilities quite enough, even though her parents have not been like, art, what is art? They're actually very supportive, but they're very caught up in their own things. And to her, sort of the standards of excellence that she's used to, those are things completely not possible for her. And so part of it is about recognizing her own perspective and viewpoint and why that matters. That both let me get around having too much technical science talk, because Marguerite wouldn't know that and wouldn't tell you. But it actually ended up being really critical, because who she is as an artist, when she's in the different dimensions, she's thinking about it in terms of, sort of who might have painted this? What kind of perspective does this show the world? And when she's in her other selves, you always leap into another version of you. Sometimes their art differs from her, and she can tell through that sort of how that person's world is different. This person's much more into little subtle details. This person looks at great big extremes. It tells her something about her perspective. Paul is sort of the main guy in 1,000 Pieces of You, and he's supposed to be working on a PhD in physics, and he's 19. And what does that tell you about him? A, he's very smart. B, this guy left school when he was so young that he has never had anything approaching a social life ever. He's always been with people way older than him, always been sort of intimidated by that. And so it was fun having somebody who is, on the one hand, so intelligent and very sure, but on the other hand, very out of it when it comes to some things about music and pop culture, and also not really knowing, say, how to date, not having ever sort of gone out and partied with friends because he was 12 and his college friends were not. And then there's Theo. He's another one of the guys, and he was the toughest because he actually had to explain some of the science. And I was like, how do you have that guy and not have him be a bore? And then all of a sudden in my brain, it was sort of like, he's young Tony Stark from the Avengers movies. Young Tony Stark. He's got all that attitude and all that confidence. And he explains because he's showing off. He can't not tell you. And so that gave me a good way to have somebody explaining the stuff in a way that was going to feel very natural to his character. And also he does it in a funny way. Hopefully that makes it more engaging for the reader than just a lot of sort of dull science fact. Anyway, so that was sort of the origins of those guys in that story.
So speaking about the science fact, did you do a lot of research to make sure that there was some level of correlation with, real science in the book?
No to real science, but yes to a lot of research. For some reason, I've always read a little bit about this. I've always found it interesting. I'm not a scientist, so I'm just reading popular science books, but still. And one of the things I think is most interesting that maybe sort of the average person on the street doesn't know is that most physicists, like the idea that there are parallel dimensions, that there are other realities slightly different, most of them totally agree that's real. That's not sort of a far-fetched hypothesis. The scientific community is pretty much like, yeah, that's happening. That's absolutely happening. But of course, we're nowhere near even being able to perceive such things, much less interact with them. So however I was going to be doing it was going to be pure science fantasy. It had to act like science. It had to follow rules that would be sort of absolute in the way that a scientific device might work or not work. But that's total fantasy. But the research I did at least, there are some conversations that her parents have, or Theo and Paul have, that at least nod to some of the real things that scientists working on this might know. But in all honesty, I thought it was better to just acknowledge most of that as pure fantasy and leave the real science as undamaged as possible. Because it really is a fantasy version of it.
Of course. So, what are you working on now, Claudia? Give our viewers a peek into that.
Right now, I am finishing up final edits on Defy the Stars, which is my April 2017 book, at least in the US. It is not a Star Wars book. It is the beginning of a new series that I'm doing, and it's YA, it's science fiction. It is about a young soldier from a colony world that has broken free of Earth's control in an attempt to save themselves. And the robotic warrior she finds stranded in an old ship damaged in the early battles of the war. But this robotic warrior was sort of a special prototype to begin with, and he's been stuck on that ship for 30 years with nothing to do but think. And during that time, his mind has changed from something that was maybe purely mechanical to something much more. And it's the two of them having this adventure when he has to follow her command. She's the human on board. He's got to do it, even though her plan works against absolutely all of his interests. It's told in equal parts between the two perspectives. I had a lot of fun writing Noemi and Abel and setting up this world with all the colony planets and how you travel between them. I've had a blast with it. I'm hoping readers will too.
I'm sure they will, Claudia, and I'm sure your book's going to do really well. Of course, it's still a while away, so we look forward to learning more about it in due course. With that, we'll bring this session to an end, and thank you so much for taking time out and joining us.
Oh, thank you.
Great. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.